My Govanen, and welcome to the Palantir podcast, the broadcasting arm of GHG Palantir. We are an offshoot of the Grey Havens Group, a nonprofit focused on improving literacy and imagination. You can find out more about us at greyhavensgroup.org or search for us at Facebook. I'm your host, Tim Woodman. I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of what we've been discussing online at the Grey Havens Group Palantir, which is a fully online Tolkien discussion group using Google Hangouts. We've just begun our discussion of the Silmarillion with the Ainulindale. It's actually a conversation that's been going on for the last 3 weeks and will continue for a fourth. The Ainulindale is really the foundation of Tolkien's entire legendarium. There's much to be drawn from it throughout the entirety of the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, and even The Hobbit if you look for it. Much of Tolkien's philosophy, much of Tolkien's ideas about creation and the created are found in the Ainulindale. Much about his ideas about time and conflict and the movements of the world, or the movements of Arda at least, are found in this tale. The Ainulindale is only about 10 pages. It's shocking how much information Tolkien packs into that amount of space. Essentially, the Ainulindale is Middle-earth's creation story. It's written in an archaic tone and very similar to a biblical text. It has that feel, it has that weight. And so it can be off-putting. But when you read it, the main idea of it is the music itself, the music of the Ainur. That's what the Ainulindale means. The music of the Ainur is essentially how Middle-earth is created. It begins with Iluvatar, the creator, the god, the one, Eru, one, who propounds a great theme of music to the Ainur, who can be thought of as angelic beings that he's created. In a sense, they are the first children of Iluvatar. And after he has elaborated this theme for them, he gives them the charge to elaborate on it, to sing a great opus for him. And they do. During this time, however, one of the Ainur, Melkor, rises up and sings a contrary tune. And Iluvatar counters this with a second theme, which is different from the first, and yet still the two are in conflict. And then he meets it with a third theme, which is sad and slow and melancholy, and yet full of a depth and power that cannot be found in Melkor's own theme. And as Iluvatar says, essentially all that Melkor does but increases the glory of the works of Iluvatar's main theme. And the third theme is really where we see this. After the music is sung, Iluvatar takes the Ainur out into the void and shows them a great vision of what they've actually been singing about. Up till this point, the Ainur have not understood what the music actually is or what its purpose is. And so they see a vision of the earth, of Arda, created before them, and they begin to see its history played out. And they begin to see and understand a little bit about what their music has wrought and how it's interacted and led to things that they didn't initially sing about or know would come into existence. After this, the music is gone, the vision rather disappears. And Iluvatar charges the Ainur to essentially make it be. incarnate what they have sung. And the world is created. And the Ainur, at least some of them, who become the Valar, enter the world and begin the great work of its creation, of its preparation for the children of Iluvatar, the elves and the men. That's the main idea of the Ainulindale. And it's a lot packed into just a few short pages. This tale is probably one of Tolkien's most incredible, both in terms of its prose, its philosophical thought, and its meaning for everything that's going to come afterwards. And hence, that's why Greyhaven's group Palantir has been discussing it for so long and will continue to discuss it. We have one more meeting planned. And yet, at the same time, this will also be something that we will bring up and return to throughout the entirety of the Silmarillion. The Ainulindale is the foundation. It is the bedrock on which the rest of the story is written. And by that, I also include The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which Tolkien himself thought of as the end to these stories. And Sam himself, in The Pass of Cirith Ungol, says essentially the same thing, that we are part of the same story. We're looking up at the Star of Eärendil, and we are still part of that same story, the story we are about to read in the Silmarillion. When we meet in GHG Palantir, we talk about a wide variety of topics, and we often go far astray. But our main focus is to try to see what we haven't seen before, to discover and to mine the great jewels in the text that we haven't noticed, or that we haven't fully understood, or haven't fully seen the implications of. When reading the Ainulindale, one of the first things you notice is the character of Melkor. He's described as being the greatest of the Ainur, and that he's been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and that he had a share in all of the gifts of his brethren. Not only is he most powerful then, but he also has some part of the skills, the desires, and the power of each of the other Ainur, which makes him unique. Who is Melkor? Why does he fall? This is at least one of the central questions of the Ainulindale, if not the Quenta Silmarillion as well. Although arguably by that point he has fallen. When reading the Ainulindale, you have to look at Melkor and wonder, is he too smart for his own good? Is he the rich kid with too much material wealth, in this case with too much skill, too much innate talent for his own good, and not an understanding of how to put it to its right use? Can it be a question of nature? Can it be a question of the stress, the pressure that comes from that kind of responsibility? One of the great things about Tolkien's work, which I am sure I'm going to mention over and over again, is the idea of applicability. In this, the reader is allowed to interpret. The reader in each reading is allowed to see and interpret what is going on, who the characters are, and how they relate one to the other, not only within the story, but within what has happened in history, what is happening now, and people within their own lives, and people within Tolkien's life as well. So we can't really be sure what the motivations of Melkor are. Granted, it is stated that he greatly desires the flame imperishable. He goes out into the void searching for it. He wants a creation of his own for his own self-aggrandizement. That is actually explicitly stated when he rebels during the music, is that his movement in the music is for his own self-aggrandizement, to increase his own power. Melkor is a hard nut to crack. But one of the things we discovered during discussion is a very interesting comparison that Tolkien gives. He states, of the fabric of the earth had Aule thought, to whom Iluvatar had given skill and knowledge scarce less than to Melkor. But the delight and pride of Aule is in the deed of making, and in the thing made, and neither in possession nor in his own mastery. Wherefore he gives and hoards not, and is free from care, passing ever on to some new work. Aule and Melkor are very much related characters, at least as is stated in the Ainulindale. Both of them have an affinity for the materials of the earth, of the primal materials of the earth. Both of them have a drive towards creativity, creation, and craft. But the primary difference is the end result. Whether it's Aule, whose primary delight is in the craftsmanship itself, in the making, in the process, and in the making well, or Melkor, who delights in creation, but in dominating that creation, in ownership of that creation, in claiming that creation as a proof of his power, as a proof of his command of Arda, of the music. As Becky in our group likes to say, is it power over or power with? This is like how she likes to describe the idea of evil as we see it in the Silmarillion. Are you dominating, or are you using your power to help others, to coexist, to play your part? And yet, as we'll find out shortly in the next couple chapters, Aule rebels. And we see how tenuous is this relationship between creating and falling into a form of lust of the created. Because Aule will create the dwarves not out of joy of creation, but out of a great desire for someone to appreciate him, for someone to learn from him, for someone to depend on him. And that's his great transgression, is falling away from his main goal, which is the joy of creation, making the creation, the earth, the stone, the metals, which will become the engine of creation for his wife Yavanna, for Orome, for Manwe, who will bring to life the organic forms on Earth. And that's something obviously we'll have to return to when we get to that portion of the book. But what it tells us is a couple of things. Dan, who is also part of our group, mentioned how, as Tolkien intended, we should look at the Silmarillion as the backdrop to the Lord of the Rings. But we can also read the Silmarillion with the Lord of the Rings as a backdrop and do the reverse and see the characters and events of the Lord of the Rings and how they color what we're reading now. And in particular, looking at the character of Aule, we can look at Gimli and Gloin and all the dwarves that are shown to us as a reflection of Aule and his character. One of the other elements that comes up in the Ainulindale is the idea, the notion that the Ainur do not have physical form. They don't take on physical form until the end of the chapter. And when they do, they take on forms that are reminiscent of the children. But they only saw the children in the vision that Iluvatar gave them, which was brief, and didn't even continue through the full scope of history, but stopped short. They are creating their form, their bodies, from a memory rather than having a model in front of them. Looking at that, we can interpret very easily how Aule took it. And it's very easy to see him then as appearing like a great big dwarf. That the dwarves that we see later, just as the children of Iluvatar are made in the image and likeness of Iluvatar, the dwarves are made in the image and likeness of Aule. And therefore we can see Aule reflected in the dwarves. Another major theme, of course, during the music of the Ainur is the music itself, and how Tolkien so elegantly uses this metaphor of music to describe the nature of creation, but also to describe the nature of corruption. When Melkor raises his contrary theme, it causes confusion. It causes cacophony. It causes discord at first. But as time goes on, those that are near him join in his music and add to it. When you think about a choir, when you think about many people harmonizing together, particularly if your harmonic line is similar, or even if you have like a barbershop quartet or something similar, where you're each singing a different melodic line and even different words, how easy is it, without even noticing, to switch over to what the person next to you is singing? And even when you're over there, to start singing what's singing on the other side. It's a very simple mistake to make. And it's very telling that this is what we see here. Is that the fall, the temptation, is simple. It's easy. It sneaks up on you. It's something we should keep in the back of our mind moving forward. And it's something, too, we could potentially read into in terms of Tolkien and his ideas about the fall and ideas about corruption, temptation. It is very easy, and it is a constant presence in terms of temptation. Temptation is always there. The struggle is to put up with it, to turn aside from it, to ignore it, to move on, to sing the tune you're meant to be singing and not the tune you're tempted to sing. This led, of course, to wondering about Sauron, who we know based on the Silmarillion and other texts was once one of the Maiar under Aule. We, of course, know based on both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings that he falls. He becomes the primary evil character of the latter days of Middle-earth. And yet, he was under Aule. He was once good. And yet, when we look back at that description of Aule, which I quoted earlier, of the great delight and pride that he took in creating and craftsmanship and making well, but not possession and not mastery, we can see how slight a distinction, how fine a line there is between right and wrong action. Because that is stated as one of the primary distinctions, other than the fact that Melkor has a little bit of the power of all the other Ainur. That is the primary distinction between Aule and Melkor. So an underling of Aule would be drawn naturally to Melkor, because his form of thought, his focus would be very similar to his original master's, with only the slight adjustment that once something is created, it's mine, my possession, my precious even. We can see where that's formulating right here at the very beginning of time. We can start to look at this too and try to think of it in terms of Tolkien's own life. We can look at music. Was Tolkien involved musically? At the very least, he would have definitely heard choirs singing during the Catholic Mass, in Gregorian chant and other forms. And if he himself took part, I can pretty much guarantee you that he had moments where he started singing someone else's part, because that's what happens when you sing. When there are many parts going on at the same time, it is very easy. And so this metaphor then makes a lot of sense. It also draws on Tolkien's Catholic faith in another way, through the whole idea, I believe it's St. Augustine who says, he who sings prays twice. And this is a fairly popular idea in Catholicism, and I believe also could be said of most Christianity. And it's something that we'll see repeated over and over throughout the Silmarillion, is this idea of the strength and power of song. We've already seen it in The Lord of the Rings, with the song scaring away the Nazgul in the Old Forest, or not in the Old Forest, in the Woody End, rather. Or the song that Sam sings in Cirith Ungol, the tower, which then alerts Frodo of his presence. Songs have power that are intrinsic to them, and in particular in Tolkien's world, songs have power. Songs also are an intrinsic part of water. Olmo is described in the Ainulindale as being the most trained in the music of Iluvatar, having the most skill with the music. Therefore, it follows his own element that he's tied up with, his brainchild, if you will, which is the waters of the earth, the oceans, the seas, the rivers, the streams, are tied up in the music and hold the music within them. This is why there's such a great drive towards the water by the elves, why the elves are drawn to the water, to the sea, because they can hear pulsing in the waves, in the current, in the trickle of the waterfall, of the stream, the music of the Ainur. In Nimrodel, Legolas brings up the fact that he can hear the singing of the elves prior to their leave-taking of Middle-earth in the waterfall. He can still hear the sweet sound of their voices. He can hear the longing of the sea and the cry of the gulls in Pelargir. The music lives on in water. And what's really intriguing is the metaphors which are used by Tolkien throughout the entirety of the description of the music are water-based. The battle that goes back and forth between Melkor and Ilúvatar for mastery of the music is described in terms of a roiling sea, a storm, a trickling brook, the currents, the tides. That's the language that Tolkien uses. Because first you have the raging storm of Melkor's first attack, as if of dark waters. And then you have the second theme arise, as if out of the midst of a storm. And then you have the third theme, which has the most poignant description. That it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds and delicate melodies, but it could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. It has the movements, the feel of great oceans, of great tides and great currents. The one was deep and wide and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow, from which its beauty chiefly came. One of the interesting things when you look at the music prior to the vision is you may notice, and I discussed this in the introductory podcast, that there really isn't any discussion of sight or any other perception besides sound. Now there is some mention of Ilúvatar raising his hands, of the faces he makes, essentially, the emotion that is read in him during the music. But there's never really the use of the word sight or seeing or vision. Instead, these things are perceived. I think this is a critical word choice. And one of the things we described in our meeting today was the notion of, is there truly sight? Can there truly be sight? Because indeed, up until the creation of the world with the word Ea, let it be, there is nothing physical. The only thing with form, which we can tell because it's stated in here that Ilúvatar has hands, he has a face, is Ilúvatar. Before the word Ea, there's only the music and the vision and the void. One of the things we ended up talking about for quite some time is the idea of trying to think, trying to form an idea without the ability to think in images, without the ability to visualize. How could that be done? What would that be like? And we thought in particular of the example of Helen Keller. How would she see the world? Is it based solely on touch? are her visions of the world not visions as we would think, but rather the sense of the form of things from having touched them. Also, that led into a discussion of the nature of thought and the nature of language, which is something that is critical to an understanding of Tolkien and critical to an understanding in particular of the Silmarillion. Because Tolkien tells us himself, the birth, the driving force behind the Silmarillion is language. There was a study that was done a number of years ago that looked at languages from the point of view of speed. You have many languages around the world which seem to be varied in their speeds, some very slow, some very quick, and seem to go on at a very rapid clip. But what this study found is that the amount of time it took to express an idea, to express a thought, was essentially equal across languages. And the only thing that changed was the number of syllables to express that thought. And so the apparent change in speed was not a change in content, but rather the oral rhythm. So that each language changes how we look at the world, how we understand the world, how we express ideas. And we can look at this too from the standpoint of the Ainulindale, because we are told each of the Ainur only understand their portion of the music and very little outside. That they each have their own skills which they bring to the music. A very easy way to look at this is to say each of them are singing in their own language. Each of them have their own internal rhythm, the ideas within them which are equal and hitting the same beats, but within very different and foreign one to the next. And interestingly enough, and I didn't notice this at first, this is very much the story of the Tower of Babel. There's confusion, there's cacophony, there's discord, there's lack of understanding. It's essentially what we see in the music. Though the Ainur can communicate and understand each other, they don't really. Olmo doesn't understand at all what has happened to his water until Iluvatar explains it, doesn't understand the closeness that the clouds and the rain will bring between him and Manwe until Iluvatar explains it. Iluvatar knows the wholeness of the music. The Ainur do not. And indeed, we're told that there needs to be a second singing of the music at the end of time. And in that singing, both elves and men will take part. It will be a whole and understood music. What's interesting is the entire thought, the entire creation of the children of Iluvatar, men and elves, which we think of as being so intrinsic to the story, was not in the first theme, was not in the second theme. It did not come until the third theme. And they are wholly and completely of the thought of Iluvatar, and therefore foreign from the thought of the Ainur. And you have to wonder, when we read The Lord of the Rings in particular, we talked about the idea of Iluvatar and the Valar acting through the agency of other characters. Is the creation of elves, is the creation of men an action of Iluvatar's to create agents to fight against the discord of Melkor? Are they meant to act upon the music as an agent to correct the discord that has been created? Are the moments where the sad, deep, melancholy, slow, flowing music of the third theme embrace and triumph over the cacophony, the brashness of Melkor's theme, are those the tales we see in the Silmarillion? The tale of Beren and Luthien, the fall of Gondolin, and ultimately the birth of Eärendil, the hope of the first children. Are these the moments which we see as such triumphant moments in the music? Is the defeat of Sauron through the agency of men and hobbits another of these triumphant moments? And therefore, the only way the music can be made whole and completely understood is to include the involvement of the elves and men. We don't know, but that seems to be what's implied. And it's something that really shows how intrinsic this tale is to the entirety of Tolkien's writing. And perhaps we take it too far. I personally don't believe so. But the Ainulindale underpins and can be seen and traced throughout the entire history of Middle-earth. You can argue it one way or another, but this tale of all tales is an absolute gem for applicability, for interpretation, for discussion, for seeing the meta-narrative that underpins the entirety of the tale, from beginning to end. That is why we start with the Ainulindale, because it gives us an interpretive lens. Granted, you can look at each tale individually, and that's right and good, and Tolkien, I'm sure, would approve. But if we're looking at his writing as a feigned history, as a collection of found documents, and we're given this as our starting tale, as our foundation myth, it begins it all. Not only is this a myth that we are told contains the information, only the information, that the Valar have willingly and clearly handed on to the Eldar, but it has been then written and passed on by the Eldar, and then ultimately translated into our own tongue. So we can question the validity of what we found, if there are elements that are hidden, or elements that are left out, or elements that have been changed. And we can do this indeed for all that Tolkien has written, because especially with the Silmarillion, it's very evident, because of the nature of the beast, that it was written over the course of his entire life, and written and rewritten, and that what we've ended up with, what Christopher, his son, has put together, is really taking pieces and parts that are the most complete from across that spectrum. We in reality have something that reflects that nature of a found set of documents, which are built around a culture and a philosophy which finds its heart and its start in the Ainulindale. Until next time.